It is interesting and also imperative to understand the transition from the category of communal literatures to post-colonial literatures, the transition that has taken place all over the world, I mean, in all the English departments. We have named our paper post-colonial literatures, but when it was introduced originally, this was known as communal literature. Now, there are a few differences between these two, and the differences are not only, you know, not only in methodology, in terms of methodology, but they can be realized in terms of contents also to a great extent. So, to understand the entire business, let us start with understanding the corpus of the so called Commonwealth literatures. You know, as has been said in a classic manner by one of the influential critics, that the novel in India, for example, was a byproduct of the Anglo Indian colonial encounter. This is not only true of novel but many other writings in English. The writings in themselves had existed before the British came in India, but then English writings are absolute byproducts of the colonial encounter, many of which have possibly become now the main products and no longer the byproducts. This is also the case with countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Caribbean countries, the African countries. And we often talk about African literature like Indian literature. While in case of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we generally use the name India as symptomatic of all this literature in English from the Indian subcontinent. In case of Africa, different national literatures like Kenyan literature or Ghanaian literature, they're often clubbed together under this name of African literature because there are a lot of similarities, more similarities than dissimilarities. Now, all this come under this rubric of communal literature. In 1964, there was a conference held at the University of Leeds in England. The name of the conference itself, the topic itself was Commonwealth Literatures. And then many people, experts, writers, basically creative writers as well as critical writers, had joined the conference. And from India, I think C.D. Narasimhaya, for instance, he was one of the prominent speakers. Anyway, so this was the first formal declaration of the term Commonwealth. Then, in the same university, there was a very, very energetic faculty who acted as acting vice chancellor also at one point of time and pro vice chancellor also of that university. It's Professor William Walsh. We owe him a lot so far as the category of communal literature is concerned. Basically, he was a professor of education, but he diversified his specialization and came into communal literature in a very strong way. It became a passion with him. So, after the 1964 conference, in 1970, we see the publication of the first ever book on communal literature, or this first significant book on communal literature, that is by Professor William Walsh. That is A Manifold Voice, Studies in Communal Literature, published in 1970. Please remember, so in this book, he tries to identify some of the dominant features of Commonwealth writing, but his the greater interest lies in actually cataloging, making inventories. And he was particularly fascinated by people like V.S. Naipaul, our I mean from India, R.K. Narayan, even Nirotsi Chaudhuri, and in many cases my fascinations match his. After this, in 1973, he wrote two books. Better to say, wrote one and edited another. The the book written by him is called Commonwealth Literature. It is in a way the theoretical Bible of Commonwealth Literature, so far as Commonwealth Literature has any theory, and separate chapters on India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc. These are included. In the same year, he published another book, which is an anthology of papers on Commonwealth literature written by prominent people from all these segments. So, in the Indian part, for example, he himself has written on Niraj Chaudhary. So, the other book is called Readings in Communal Literature. Please remember the textbook that he has written, kind of textbook or theory book, is called Communal Literature, and the other book, Readings in Communal Literature, both published in 1973. So, this Leeds Conference and these three books by Professor William Walsh more or less set the tone of what comes under communal literature. The thing is, there is not much of theory in it. Theory, within course as we understand it. That is the most important feature which distinguishes it from the later title Postcolonial Literature, which is highly mediated by theory, being influenced by postcolonial theory or postcolonial studies. William Walsh and his allies like C.D. Narasimhaya, uh, Srinivasa Iyengar, all of them are Commonwealth experts, and the last two are experts in Indian literature, also Indian English literature. They basically read those texts, I mean Anglo-Indian texts, either in the line of the liberal humanist tradition, that is the texts as having or being repositories of universal human values, aesthetic, beauty, so on and so forth, and they hardly engage in or engage with the issue of colonialism, which is very prominent in writers like Chinua Achebe, because before these were written, things fall apart, the arrow of God, these books were already in place, but we do not see that kind of an engagement in those quote unquote non theoretical books. You will, for example, find a wonderful paper in one of these books, or there is another by C.D. Narasimhaya, say on things fall apart as an Aristotelian tragedy or as a tragedy. What the project is, what the author is trying to project is that it is a tragedy in the Aristotelian frame of references, or at least he tries to read it like that. Now, this is in a way an epistemic violence, to use the term used by given us by Spivak, that you know you are not acknowledging the very purpose for which the novel was written.